point, from matters politics, let's get into a conversation that many people have been taking to social media to express dissatisfaction with the manner in which government has handled the disasters and tragic incidents that have been witnessed in the country in the recent past. The latest one just past week on Wednesday, the Solai Dam bursting its banks in its wake, leaving 40 people dead, at least 40 people. Others, of course, rendered homeless, lots of property destroyed as well in that particular incident, but just one of the many incidents we've seen in the recent past. And joining me in studio, we want to have that conversation around disaster preparedness and management, because many times these things happen and all we hear are promises, a lot of reactionary types of statements as well are made by the leadership. And joining me in studio on my immediate right is Patrick Gadhara. He's a columnist as well as curator for The Elephant. Daniel Juma is a country director of Global Peace Foundation. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Gadhara, I'll begin with you. What many people talking about this disaster, especially the Solai one, which is the most recent, have talked about those deaths would have been avoidable. This should not have happened because all the signs were there. First, it was a disaster waiting to happen, but that nobody appeared to appreciate the gravity of it in light of the heavy rains. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, I do. I don't think it's a disaster that should have happened. I think that to a large extent, we knew the rains were coming. This had been predicted. The Met Department, to its credit, had been warning about this for a while. And I think had we mapped what are the potential dangers that we've had, some of the actions that we are taking now, so for example, the government has declared that it's going to have all the dams in the country are going to be inspected. You know, you would have imagined if we knew rain was coming, it's going to be a lot of rain.
Before
somebody would have thought, well, let's go and check and just make sure everything is okay. And actually, for me, it really asks a question. Are these dams inspected on a regular basis? You know, or is it that we are waiting till a disaster happens and then we react to it? So that if we move away from being reactive to starting to try and map out where our risks are, then we might actually do a better job of preventing them happening in the first place rather than reacting once deaths have occurred.
Right. And you have one of the agencies coming out in charge of this saying that they'd flagged this dam as, you know, being dangerous, that there were cracks developing, but that's where it stopped. They warned, they said something should be done, and so now it's become a back and forth, accusations, counter accusations. So they say they tried to do something, but it wasn't effected. Your thoughts?
That's very sad. Yeah. In fact, if you look at what happened here, I always say it's avoidable. It's something that shouldn't have happened in the first place. It's one of those needless disasters that we have had to go through. But look at other countries. For example, Korea, when we had disaster happen, you know, with the ferry, for example, you know, the response of the government was quick. And we had people taking responsibility. No lower than the Prime Minister of Korea resigned immediately for failure to protect the people. Here we are seeing that, you know, of course, there's response from government, but no one is taking responsibility. I would have liked to see that, you know, the government would have at least, you know, taken action, immediate action against somebody, whether it's at Warma, whether it's at Nema, because how do you have such a dam that is above the, you know, the ground and, you know, not inspected? You know, this was definitely, like you said, a disaster waiting to happen. And
you know, there's one thing I'd like to just add on to that. I mean, all this talk we're hearing now of, oh, we had warned about the dam, etc., and then nothing was done. This is a trope. This is how government always reacts. I mean, remember when we've had issues with building collapses in Nairobi, it's very much the same talk. People come and say, oh, we had inspected that building, we had warned.
Or we'd flagged it.
Exactly. But the problem here is because nobody is ever held to account for not doing anything about it, then it keeps happening. And it goes back, in fact, in your intro, you say that we move away from politics. It actually goes back to the politics, because our politics is divorced from the needs of the people. You know, politics has now become about the needs of politicians,
and
and their fights. Exactly, that's what everybody terms politics. Yet politics should be a discussion about our problems, not theirs.
Why they're in office.
Exactly, and until we actually make these people pay a price, you know, for not doing the things that we actually pay them to do, nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to change.
And we're seeing a lot of people, as you said, there should be people held to account. But we're that country that an outrage in the moment, a lot of people will say many things, and then we sweep the things under the carpet and move on. How is this accept and move on when lives are being lost? Right now, there are many people in the cold, you know, being brought for food stuff and all of this to get by. How is it we don't get angry enough to have that lead to action?
It's amazing, Sophia. We have become a nation of hashtags. You know, we trend. An issue comes today, we trend for the next 2 or even 1 week, and then we forget and move on. Another issue will come up again, and we will forget again. We need to change from that. For me, another friend of mine was telling me, you know, we need to start a petition to be able to push government, to be able to do something. They said, I'm tired about all these, you know, petitions, hashtags. We need some action. You know, we need something to happen. And for me, and this is why I would like, for example, the CS in charge of that particular tragedy, and we're just discussing with the Gadara, that it is not clear which department is in charge of disaster preparedness, because we have various bodies, this Ministry of Special Programs, Devolution, WARMA, NEMA.
So actually important to note, we were supposed to have the CS Devolution, Eugene Wamalwa. He was, however, held up with a function later this evening. That's one of the ministries handling this, Department of Special Programs. He's been spearheading this. But the management, disaster management unit, is under the Interior Ministry. But still, the question around that kind of consolidation and streamlining of those efforts. And
that's what we need. And I remember this time I used to work for the Embassy of Korea. I took, you know, officials, you know, from the government and City Hall to Korea to see how Korea had developed what they called an integrated disaster management system, you know, which was able to effectively respond. You know, if something happened, they were able to see using cameras, and people were able to call through 911, and immediately there were, for example, fire engines, if it was fire, stationed in various parts of the country that were able to respond immediately. But as, you know, we have this issue, and you saw the other day in Nakuru, when we had this helicopter crash, it was sad that to even locate swimmers to come on time.
Even a boat.
A boat.
So Gadara, what is the problem in Kenya when it comes to even mitigation? Because on one hand, you have the Met Department with these heavy rains. They've been consistent with the updates. When it will rain, where it will rain, how much rain. So the agencies involved say, okay, people are being told to move or being guided. What is that we need to do, in your view, that's the missing link?
Well, two things. First, I'll respond to something that he said about us becoming a nation of hashtags. I don't think that is the problem. In fact, I'm quite happy that people are able to come out and complain. And that's one thing that should really be encouraged. What we should be asking is how we channel that, or we make that matter. And this is why I talk about impunity in our politics. The fact that people are angry, but that we don't translate that into some form of action. So the system we have now is one that essentially says that the citizenry, what it thinks, doesn't matter. You know, the politicians can simply ride the wave, you know, and the problem goes all the way to even our media and the privileging of certain conversations, such that they say, well, Kenyans have a short memory, but it's a job of the media to remind them, you know, and to help them hold their leaders to account, and that doesn't happen. When it comes to people, I mean, to for example, the reports that we get from the Met Department, you know, they've even been saying, and it was reported actually in the Standard, I think it was yesterday or today, that the rains we've had are not above normal, which was, I found strange. But it was actually something that the Standard quoted them saying, And what they're saying, the problem is not so much what is coming down, is what's happening on the ground. So we have denuded our forests. We don't have proper drainage systems, etc. Yeah. So that's what's causing the disaster. So in a large sense, the problem is in the rain. The problem is the fact that the systems we have set up or have failed to set up, are not mitigating it when the rain comes. So we go through these cycles of drought, and there's national drought was declared a national disaster. And a year later or 2 years later, we are declaring floods a national disaster. That tells us something. We haven't prepared the ground for this. Yeah. We are not thinking through. When you look at our infrastructure for dealing with disasters, it's spread out. So, for example, floods are under WARMA, which is under the Ministry of Water and Irrigation.
Water, yes.
You've got NDOC and the National Disaster Committee, and you also have the National Disaster Management Unit. Yes. That's in the Ministry of Interior. Right. And you've got various other, I think there are about 8 from a study that was done by DFID. So there's no real coordination between all of this agencies so that we get an effective response to disaster. So I think that we need to rethink the entire approach and the entire infrastructure around it. I know there's the bill that's currently in the Senate, to set up yet another agency, the National Disaster Risk Management Authority. But it's supposed to, from my reading of it, this authority is supposed to be an umbrella body that brings...
To collapse all of this, as you mentioned, institutions, collapse
into
them
one,
to
which would be fantastic if that happened.
Yeah.
But then you've got to also think about the counties. The counties are setting up their own disaster management agencies. So you've got one in Nairobi, you've got another in Kilifi, etc. How do those link up to the national architecture? Yeah. So it's that lack of coordination that means we can't really move to address some of these things.
And that bill does talk about, though, how the counties would be involved, that under it then there would be the offices or committees, they call them, in the various counties.
Right. It's setting up new committees, but it's not saying what happens to the existing ones.
Collapsing them. My reading of it, they say collapse them in the transitional period. The staff come into
this. So they all come into this. Yeah. So that needs to be really well articulated so that the counties know. Because if you see, for example, when it comes to declaring a disaster, it's the agency, NADIMA, that declares it. But decides whether it's a county disaster or it's a national disaster, not the county that decides.
Not the county.
So there I foresee that would be problematic, because there are resource implications about it. Some counties might say, well, we think we can handle this. What happens if NADIMA disagrees?
All right. We'll get to hear your views, Juma, on the same, and whether you think this formation of a disaster risk authority is the solution. But I wanted to listen to President Kenyatta. Just yesterday, during that national tree planting ceremony, he gave and announced a 1 billion shillings allocation to the Kenya Red Cross. Let's listen to that.
That an extra 1 billion shillings will be made available to the Kenya Red Cross to continue its relief work, in addition to the 1.5 billion shillings.
So the president began there by sending his condolences and talking about a lot needing to be done, talking about that allocation to Kenya Red Cross. But on the government agencies, what he said is they'll continue to work together. Do you think that is sufficient? Because there are government agencies, as we've been saying, that are mandated to do this. Clearly, things are not working as they should. Kenya Red Cross do a great job. They're hailed for that. Yeah. But is this the kind of reaction and action you expected from the president?
I didn't. What we need now and moving forward is a national disaster fund. We need a government-managed fund that is there, that is waiting to manage any disaster that comes on board. And I'm happy that this is one of the requirements in the new bill, which is in front of the Senate. I would rather, whatever money is allocated to a fund that's managed by government, because, Sophia, the problem we are having right now is even when immediately Solai happened, you could see so many posts, pay bills.
The government is setting up one.
Even the government.
Yeah, yes. Even, of course, Red Cross is receiving, and I must really congratulate Red Cross. They have done a wonderful job. The money that they have been given by the government, we will go towards good use, I know. But we don't have to be doing this just after there is a disaster that has happened. I'm hopeful that as soon as this bill, is enacted, we can have a fund, that is there, that is ready, that can be able to manage all these things whenever it happens.
Gadara, we've talked a lot about what government needs to do, what needs to be put in place. When we talk disasters, what's the place of ordinary Mwananchi?
Well, I think the first place of ordinary Mwananchi is to fund government, which he does very well. I think the second place, the other thing that people need to do is really to hold that government to account. We have in Kenya, which I find funny, this Serikali Saidia thing, where we demonize people who are actually demanding that government does what they pay it to do. I think the real and proper role for people in reacting to these sorts of tragedies is not to go and contribute to an M-Pesa account that is set up by that government that you already fund to do these things. It is to hold that government to account. That is what prevents disasters happening. If government actually worked, if it did the job it is supposed to do, then we wouldn't have to be contributing to all of this. So I think there is a real problem for us when we are kind of guilted by the people who are responsible for these disasters into saying that it's up to us to do something about it. No, we are paying them. They have jobs. That's why they have them. If they can't do them, let them move away from all of this. What if when
citizens notice worrying signs of something that's about to happen?
Well, they need to bring that to the attention of the authorities. Right. I mean, for sure. I mean, the dam, for example, in Solai, I mean, even Koigi has been saying, people were complaining about it for a while. So the failure wasn't in them. The failure was within government. Yeah. But I'll say one other thing that I think we need to think about is what we define as disaster. We've had, and this will go to, again, what we want Nadima, for example, if it's set up to do.
Right.
People have been calling sometimes for poaching to be declared a national disaster. What does that actually mean? Should we declare a national disaster about what's happening on our roads? When we've got, depending on who you believe, between 5,000 and 15,000 people dying every year. Should that be a national disaster? I think the things that link all of these things together is that we are constantly reacting to what's happening rather than being proactive. So instead of of us looking at the roads and designing systems that mitigate and ensure that we don't have the sorts of accidents. When you look at our building situation, we are constantly again waiting for the next collapse before we start asking questions. Exactly.
So proactive.
So we need to be a lot more proactive, and we need to have a real well thought out plan that links up all the risks that we have, looks at all of them, and creates ways of mitigating them.
Okay.
And then we hold the people who we put in these positions to account to actually deliver on them.
All right. Your final thoughts, sir?
Yeah, I think moving forward, I think whatever has happened is a lesson to us. I think we need
Haven't we learned many already?
I think we've learned many lessons.
Learn them. This is the thing. We don't.
Let's hope this is another great lesson, and that right now after this, like I heard today, all the dams will be inspected. I think moving forward, we really need to organize ourselves. Look at, for example, fire extinguishers. Some of these counties, Some of the countries don't even have a single fire extinguisher, for example. This is terrible. And then again, I'm thinking that, disaster management is a national security issue. So even as much as we want to devolve some of it, we shouldn't do that. As much as national security is still within the national government, I think the national government should make sure that they are in charge of disaster management. Sometimes in the U.S., whenever maybe hurricane happens in another county, in another government,
right.
the president sometimes actually goes there and actually supports. So we need to see the government being proactive,
right.
but don't leave it to the county alone. When it happens, let's see national security, everyone getting involved so that it is quickly managed.
I have to say one thing very, very quickly.
Briefly, yes.
Yeah. Very briefly. First, let's not put it under the rubric of national security, because that's where we normally hide lots of the bad things that happen. And the second thing, we should remember that the biggest risk that this country faces isn't even from natural disasters, it's from elections. And so when we are thinking about mitigating disasters, the first thought should be, how do we mitigate the problems that are caused by elections?
Okay.
And we need to fix that, because if we do that, we take away a big, huge risk that we suffer and it's predictable every 5 years.
Well put. Thank you very much. Patrick Gadara is curator for The Elephant, and Daniel Juma is a country director of the Global Peace Foundation, for being with us on that conversation. Disaster management, mitigation of the same. Thank you as well for staying with us here on Checkpoint. We're not